I never imagined betrayal could sound so quiet. Not a scream, not a fight, just a silence that slices deeper than any knife. That night, looking at them, I realized life doesn't always explode. Sometimes it simply collapses, and you find yourself standing in the ruins, still breathing. And in that moment, I knew my life would never belong to them again. From now on, it was mine and mine alone. Once, it seemed to me that happiness was a straight line you could walk without effort. I loved the early morning hours, when silence was still transparent like crystal, and every sound cut through it clearly and softly, the water boiling in the kettle, footsteps down the hall, the breathing of a child. In those moments the world seemed tall and tender, like a blanket someone had wrapped around me. I believed that everything in our home was in its right place. My husband Ethan, my sister Brooke, my mother Helen with her demanding care, and me, a woman trying to be a pillar without losing herself. I kept telling myself that this was how it was meant to be. Family is the place where you are held, not broken. The birth of my daughter, Chloe, became a loud, bright chord that didn't fade for a long time. I remember holding her tiny hand against my chest and thinking that a door had opened inside me into the part of the world where everything had meaning. My body, for the first time in a long time, felt like home, not like something being tested or corrected. I caught every small change within myself, how my mind slowed when I pressed my cheek to her hair, how my heartbeat grew stronger when I heard her sleepy sigh. I felt alive to the point of pain, and it was the right kind of pain, fast like the ocean at dawn. My mother Helen persistently reminded me that a woman must keep the home like a ship keeps its course. Her words lived inside me silently, like a built-in metronome. To endure means to love, to restrain means to be strong. I didn't argue aloud, because you rarely win arguments with a mother who measures love through discipline. But the warm presence of Chloe and the steady, confident hand of Ethan, my husband, gave me the feeling that I could build my own walls in my own way, wider, with bigger windows and an open door for the light. The ideal in our home wasn't a picture from a magazine, it was almost tangible texture, the smooth table always topped with fruit, the scent of vanilla in the kitchen, the notebook with my messy list where buy milk stood next to don't forget to breathe deeper. Brooke, my sister, was often there. Her laughter filled the rooms like music that made everything lighter. I loved seeing Ethan laugh at her jokes. It seemed natural. They were kindred spirits in the light things, in wit, in ease, in how quickly they could lift my worries with just a look or a word. I rejoiced that we had no cold cracks, that all the lines converged in one warm center. But peace is an eternity. It's a fragile bridge over water. It looks solid, feels reliable, but it always depends on how many more steps it can bear. At first I felt only a shadow, as if someone slightly changed a familiar melody, still the same tune, but half a tone lower. Ethan started staying late, explaining it as work, and I found myself not wanting to ask for details. There were too many little laters. Later we'll talk. Later we'll figure it out. Later we'll go to the park. Those laters piled up like dust on a bookshelf, unnoticed day by day, until one day you touch the surface and find a gray trace on your fingers. I still listened closely to Chloe's breathing through her words that were like soft pebbles, round and barely distinguishable. Her laughter pulled me back to myself, like a rubber band pulls a paper airplane into a child's hand. Sometimes I sat by her crib and listened to the silence as if it were a rare record, afraid to scratch it. In those moments, I felt clearly how my body was learning a new balance, between caring for a child and caring for myself, between knowing when to yield and when to say enough. Brooke and I often stayed in the kitchen together when Ethan went out on business. She helped me fold laundry, snapping clothespins with such confidence it seemed like she was tuning some invisible string in the house. I valued her presence, her quickness, the way she picked things up without being asked. But over time her care began to feel excessive, like tea that's too sweet, enchanting at first, but leaving thirst behind. Sometimes her gaze slid toward the door just before Ethan's steps sounded. Sometimes her laughter came quieter, as if she were saving her voice. I didn't want to see anything extra in it, but my body reacted with tension before my thoughts did sharp, like the movement of a cat catching a strange rustle. The first warning signs aren't loud, they are more like a mechanical beeping behind the wall, something you think you imagine. I began noticing a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on Ethan's shirts, not bright, not obvious, just a shade I never chose. It lingered on his collar like the faintest mark of a touch, fading by morning but leaving behind emptiness, like a shadow that disappears in bright light. I told myself it was just the office elevator, all the smells mixing, that people stand too close at meetings, and the world is simply small. But scents rarely lie, they're like letters that form words even if you're not ready to read them. I noticed his walk changing when he came home late, lighter, springier, the way someone moves when carrying a secret like a fresh piece of news. His voice grew half a tone brighter when he spoke about meetings, and my heart grew half a tone quieter when I nodded, pretending to play along. Inside me tension pulled, not sharp, but thick, like molasses, wrapping around and binding every movement. More and more I felt my body moving cautiously, almost silently, as if I didn't want to disturb the silence that might be hiding an answer. One evening, folding laundry, I found his t-shirt on the table, soft, the kind he liked to wear at home. The fabric was still warm, as if from another body, and for a second it seemed like I already held material proof in my hands. But there was nothing incriminating, no hair, no lipstick, not even the strong perfume I feared. Only that faint sweet scent again. I sank into a chair and stared at the folds of fabric, as if they contained the code to an answer I wasn't ready to face. At night I began rereading old notes from before Chloe was born, back when I thought my whole life was ahead of me and every plan was possible. Lists of wishes filled those pages, from silly to serious: learn a new language, see the ocean, ride a bike across the city, wake up one day with nothing pressing on my chest. I found myself remembering that earlier version of me, trying to bring back her voice that once sounded louder. It wasn't escape. It was like laying out old photographs to figure out exactly what you lost along the way. Meanwhile, Brooke stayed longer and longer. She dropped by for a minute, but stayed until late evening, saying she wanted to watch Chloe while I showered or washed dishes. Her care became a shadow that appeared before the object itself. I caught her eyes on me, intent, measuring, not malicious. And then that same look slipped past me, landing behind my back, as if there was an invisible thread passing through me to someone else. In those moments the air thickened, and I felt myself soften too much, like a pillow that takes any shape just to make someone else comfortable. Inside me grew a feeling hard to name. It wasn't jealousy. Jealousy is hot, but everything in me felt cold and steady, like someone walking on thin ice, knowing the main thing is not to make sudden moves. It wasn't anger. Anger needs a direction, and I felt more like water, taking the shape of the container until it cracks. More than anything, it was a warning light, a small yellow glow inside me, flashing caution. I was learning not to smother it, not to explain it away, not to bargain with myself. Just to see it. Just to remember it. One evening the phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I glimpsed the notification without reading the name, just the first words, "Miss you already." Time stretched oddly in that moment, like a ribbon being pulled from within. I didn't grab the phone, didn't ask, didn't look for excuses. I just froze and listened to my own breathing. It grew shallow and uneven, like someone suddenly realizing they need more air than usual. I heard footsteps in the hall, light, quick, and rested my palm on the table, keeping it relaxed. When Ethan walked in, I was already holding myself steady, like holding a fragile cup filled to the brim, no unnecessary movement. From that night on, our embraces changed. It was as if a thin film had formed between our bodies, one you couldn't break without cutting skin. His hand lingered on my back a fraction of a second less, my chin on his shoulder stayed a fraction longer. These micro shifts are invisible from outside, but inside they roar like a rhythm change in a familiar song. I marked those pluses and minuses in my head like an accountant who knows the balance fault us not only with big sums, but with the tiniest entries. Brooke kept being helpful, bringing groceries, picking up Chloe, staying late so I could rest. Gratitude mixed with nausea in me. That cocktail of contradictions burned my tongue. I didn't want to suspect, but my body already suspected. Sometimes she brought pastries, and the warm cinnamon smell filled the house so thickly it made me want to throw open all the windows. I watched Ethan take a bun and noticed their fingers almost brush accidentally, casually, peacefully. My stomach tied itself in a knot, not from one touch, but from the pattern of such accidents. I started waking up at night and listening to the house, the fridge clicking, the wood of the windowsill creaking, Chloe turning in her sleep. I heard my own heart as if it lay beside me on the pillow. Each time I asked myself, what is this beat telling me? It wasn't panic, only insistence. Like someone tapping from inside, asking to be let out. I was learning to open. First to myself. Once, putting clothes away, I noticed a box on the top shelf I hadn't touched in a while. Inside were photos of the kind where we still smile freely. On one picture we were three, me, Ethan, and Brooke. Standing so close it seemed we could merge into one. And suddenly I noticed something I had missed, their eyes meeting across me as if I were the bridge, not the shore. I traced the glossy paper with my finger, and it felt like I was drawing a line between past and present. Not to tear it, but to mark it. From then on I grew more attentive to details that usually slip away. Ethan checking his phone in the bathroom with the door shut. Brooke leaving by accident more of her things, a scarf, earrings, a notebook. The house began to feel like a stage where the props changed too often for a family drama. And I felt like a spectator who knows, if the props change, a new act is about to begin. Inside me didn't grow revenge, but understanding. I was learning to choose stillness over outburst, watching over accusation, truth over premature words. Sometimes I stepped onto the balcony and let the cold air envelop me whole. The cold brought me back to my body, to the present moment, to the simple idea that I didn't have to live in the fog of someone else's explanations. I stood gripping the railing and felt a new center of gravity forming inside me, not in their confessions, not in their excuses, but in myself. I didn't tell my mother. I knew Helen would say a woman must hold the family, that all men are the same, that a dirty laundry must not leave the house. I didn't want borrowed recipes for my pain. Inside me was silence thick as snow before a storm, and I understood my steps had to be deliberate. My child was my compass, my starting point. My body, rocking Chloe, itself suggested the solution, soft, steady motions that keep balance even when everything around is swaying. The warning signs grew louder on ordinary days. One morning I found Brooke's sweater on the chair in our bedroom, not in the living room. The question fell on me like a weight and stayed there, not demanding an answer right away, but not letting me breathe freely either. I touched the fabric and smelled that same sweet perfume I had caught on Ethan's collar. At that moment the world didn't collapse, it just shifted inside me, like a river quietly changing its course. That evening I washed dishes longer than needed. I stalled, as if waiting for answers to float up on their own like fish drawn to light. I heard Ethan and Brooke laughing in the other room. Their laughter sounded natural, easy, the same laughter I had heard thousands of times. But now every shift in tone cut into me. I realized my lips were pressed tight and forced them to relax. My face became a mask of calm, but inside me a tide was rising and not destructive, but gathering strength, like the ocean pulling in before a wave. Late that night, with the house asleep, I opened my phone's notes. I began writing down everything I had noticed in recent days, the scent, the times, the objects, the chance phrases, the tones. Not to accuse you to see the whole picture. I felt how words lined up like a ladder, helping me rise above the fog. And I climbed carefully, step by step, making sure not to fall into hasty conclusions. I saw my reflection in the mirror change. There was something new in my eyes, not fatigue, not anger, but determination that didn't need many words. As if a motor had started inside me, one that wouldn't stall at someone else's shouts. I studied myself like a stranger in a crowd, trying to see what made me stand out. And I realized it was my silence carrying within it an action that was still forming. Sometimes, outside in the yard, I envied those who didn't know how easily a familiar world could collapse. But envy gave way to a strange relief. I saw the cracks, which meant I could strengthen the walls or leave before they fell. That wasn't defeat. It was another kind of victory, not over someone else, but over what tried to strip me of myself. And in that understanding, a new me was being born, not the one seeking validation from others, but the one standing on her own. With each day, I needed fewer words and more precise actions. I cleaned the house as if I were putting my inner world in order, arranging things on shelves like arranging thoughts. I cooked slowly, watching water boil, bubbles rising, steady, inevitable. I liked that little alchemy, from raw to ready, from scattered to whole. I wanted the same for my life, and yet I didn't close my eyes. I saw how they stood just a bit too close, how their laughter sometimes sounded in unison, how the silence between them was taut but unbroken. The clearer I saw it, the stronger my desire not to destroy myself prematurely grew. I saved my strength like matches in the rain, cupped in my palm, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes I ask myself, and you, who will listen to this, what would you have done in my place? Believed the first scent, the first shudder, the first wrong look? Or waited until the facts formed a picture impossible to ignore? I chose the second. Not from weakness, but from respect for myself. I wanted to face the truth not on the run, but standing upright, so I would never doubt my own steps. The last warning sign, the one I couldn't dismiss, came one morning when I found a delicate pendant ring on the nightstand that definitely wasn't mine. It lay there calmly, as if it had always belonged more than I did. I picked it up and felt my heartbeat change. It wasn't thunder, not a scream, just clarity, suddenly lit inside. I carefully set it back down, like closing a book at a page you'll easily find again. That day I made breakfast and smiled, listening to their voices. I moved softly, as if someone was asleep in the house I didn't want to wake. But it wasn't them I was protecting. It was myself. Not for a scene, for the strength to turn the page without trembling fingers. I knew I was entering the part of the story where coincidences don't exist. And when evening fell on our house, I would no longer be the same. This was only the beginning. Believe it or not, but it's the little things that can hurt the most. Not loud scenes, not confessions to your face, but the small details hiding in everyday life until you stop piecing them into a pattern. More and more I felt that our home had stopped being a fortress and had turned into something like a stage where someone else's play was being acted out. The decorations were the same at the table, the chairs, the smell of coffee in the morning, the warm toys in my daughter's crib. But when I let my eyes linger a little longer, I felt that the roles in this play had been assigned without my participation. Ethan had changed. He still smiled, but that smile carried tension, like a rubber band ready to snap if pulled just a little more. He still touched me, but his touches were mechanical, as if his hand was performing a routine action while he himself was somewhere else. I tried to smother these observations, telling myself, "You're tired, you have a child, your hormones, too many worries." But the body can't be fooled. My body knew something had changed. Brooke, my sister, stayed around more often than before. At first it felt like salvation or help with little things, care for Chloe, a chance to breathe for a minute. But her presence began to feel like perfume that's too strong, pleasant at first, then sticky and intrusive. I noticed how she lingered by the door as if waiting for someone. I caught her seeming to know more than she said. One evening I was putting laundry away in the closet and saw a sweater on the shelf that wasn't mine. Soft, thin, carrying the smell of sweet perfume I had never chosen. I knew that scent, a faint note that sometimes clung to Ethan's collar when he came home late. I picked up the sweater and felt my fingers trembling, though I tried to keep them steady. I put it back as if nothing had happened, but inside me something snapped quiet, soundless, like a thin branch in the forest. My heart grew more attentive to sounds. I heard them laughing in another room, and that laughter sounded different, not shared family laughter, but private, too intimate, as if they shared a secret I couldn't reach. I tried to explain it away as close as between siblings, but my muscles tightened, my stomach clenched, my breath shortened. It was like an alarm you can't switch off. At some point I started writing everything down in notes, the scents, the times of coming and going, the items left behind, the strange looks. I wrote short phrases, as if I were mapping what was happening in my life. Each note was like a dot on paper, and over time those dots began connecting into lines. One day my neighbor Janice stopped me at the entrance. Her gaze was too attentive, her voice too careful. She said she had seen Ethan at a cafe. At first I smiled, suspecting nothing, but then she added, he wasn't alone. I felt the ground shift slightly under my feet, as if I had stepped amidst a stair. I didn't ask questions, didn't ask for details. That one phrase was enough. Inside me it blossomed into thick, sticky anxiety. I went home and sat by the window for a long time, staring at the empty street. I thought about how easily trust collapses. It doesn't fall like glass shattering into pieces. It seeps away like water through a crack. At first I noticed, then one day you realize the vessel is already empty. My mother, Helen, didn't share my worries. When I cautiously tried to hint that I felt something was wrong, she brushed it off. Her face turned to stone, her voice cold. You're imagining too much. Men get tired. Men stay late. Men joke with your sister. That's no reason to ruin a family. In her words I didn't hear care, but command. She always spoke as if her truth were the only possible one. But for the first time I felt her voice sounded against me, not for me. At night I woke up from my own thoughts. Lying next to Ethan, I listened to his breathing and realized I felt no peace. His calm sleep irritated me, because mine was full of anxiety. I turned over, pressed my palm to my chest, and felt my heart beating unevenly as if stumbling at every step. Over time I noticed another odd thing. Brooke was leaving more and more of her things at our place, cosmetics, jewelry, clothes. They appeared as if by accident, but too often for coincidence. I saw her earrings on the nightstand, her notebook on the shelf, her scarf on the chair. The house started smelling not only of me, but of her. And that smell didn't leave. One day I decided to tidy up and put all her things into a box. I wanted to return them to Brooke, but never found the right moment. The box stood in the corner of the bedroom, almost staring at me, reminding me there was something extra here. Every time I saw it, tension rose in me. Ethan started going out to meetings more and more. His footsteps in the hallway sounded different, hurried, carrying a light joy, as if he were heading somewhere he was awaited. I tried to smile, pretended to believe his explanations, but inside me the cult kept building. That cult wasn't panic, it was clarity. I was beginning to understand that the truth was closer than I was willing to admit. And then one moment that cold cut into my life like a blade. I walked into the bedroom and saw them together. Not in an embrace, not in a kiss, but far too close to be called coincidence. Their shoulders nearly touched, their eyes met for a split second, and in that second I understood everything. My breath grew heavy, as if I had climbed to the 10th floor. I stood still, and inside me spread a strange feeling, a mix of pain and a strange relief. Pain because my worst suspicions were confirmed. Relief because I no longer had doubts. I left the room quietly, leaving them in their little world. I allowed myself for the first time to accept the obvious and felt, now this story would unfold, but I would be the author of its ending. Something clicked inside me, quiet but irreversible. It felt like the moment when an old lock finally lets go of a door. One effort, a faint sound, and the way back is closed forever. From that evening, the world was no longer the same. My husband Ethan and my sister Brooke were no longer the background of my life. They had become its cracks. Their smiles seemed too forced, their gestures too coordinated. Everything that once looked natural now exposed a hidden subtext. It was as if I had changed lenses, and in front of me opened a new, painfully sharp picture. I noticed his touches had green light, as if he touched me through glass. When he hugged me, I felt his body present, but his heart in that moment was somewhere else. I smiled back, but inside me grew an emptiness that slowly filled with cold. Brooke kept spending far too much time in our house. Her care felt excessive, intrusive, as if she was claiming the right to be part of my everyday life more than a sister should. She left behind her perfume, which I caught on Ethan's clothes as well. That scent was like a brand, and every time I smelled it, nausea arose in me, something I couldn't hide even from myself. The open conflict began with silence. I stopped playing along with their performance. Before, I nodded at my husband's words, pretended to believe his excuses for being late. I thanked Brooke for her help, though deep down I already knew her care was fake. But now I simply stayed silent. I looked at them longer than necessary and let the pauses stretch. That pause was heavy, like lead, and I saw how they couldn't bear its weight. At night I listened to his breathing. It sounded calm, steady, as if he slept peacefully without fear. And my heart beat unevenly, stumbling, as though inside me lived someone endlessly knocking, demanding to be let out. And I understood I could no longer waste myself on waiting. I had to prepare. Anger in me was hot, but I was learning to cool it, turning it into a weapon. If I broke down then, they would deny everything. They would make me out to be hysterical. Betrayers always build their defense out of lies, and that defense only collapses when pinned with facts. That meant I needed proof. I began watching them with cold focus. I learned to hear even breathing, to catch the smallest movements, to notice glances. My silence became a mirror in which they reflected, and the longer I kept silent, the clearer that reflection became. Once I entered the living room and saw them together. They weren't touching, but the distance between them was too small. Their knees almost brushed, their shoulders leaned closer than an ordinary conversation required. I walked past, pretending to look for a book. I lingered by the shelf longer than needed and felt the air thicken with tension. When I left, there was no doubt left in me. They had already crossed the line where innocence no longer exists. The turning point came with a random photo. I was going through pictures and found one from last holiday. In it were the three of us, me, Ethan, and Brooke. I stood between them, smiling as if I were happy. With their eyes they were looking at each other, not at the camera. That moment was frozen on paper, and now I saw what I had missed then. I ran my finger across the photograph, and something flipped inside me. Betrayal hadn't appeared yesterday. It had lived beside me for a long time, and I had just kept closing my eyes. After that I decided to stop resisting the obvious. I understood. The struggle was not in shouting or tears. The struggle was in patient silence, storing strength until the moment came to pour out in one destructive wave. I began playing a role. I became soft and smiling again, as if I suspected nothing. I agreed to their suggestions, nodded when Ethan said he was leaving on business. I thanked Brooke for her help, but inside me a new plan was forming. Let them believe I was broken. Let them relax and stop hiding. Then I would have the chance to strike at the very heart. I started hiding small recorders in the house. I recorded fragments of their conversations, random whispers, words they said thinking I couldn't hear. Sometimes the recordings were unclear, but even hints were enough. Each file became a brick in the wall I was building. I was becoming someone else. I looked at my husband and my sister and saw not close people, but accomplices in betrayal. I felt my fear leaving, giving way to cold calm. That calm was more dangerous than any scream. And then came what became the last straw. One evening I walked into the bedroom and saw Brooke's bracelet on my pillow. It lay there so confidently, as if it belonged in that place more than I did. I picked it up and the cold seared my fingers. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a challenge. A sign that they were no longer hiding. I stared at that bracelet for a long time and felt the last spark of hope die in me. But with it came a new feeling of clarity. Not rage, not hysteria, but cold, crystalline clarity. Let them be sure I was blind. Let them think I had surrendered. But I knew my story was not finished yet. After that night, when Brooke's bracelet lay on my pillow, I could no longer lie the way I had before. Something inside me had died for good, but with it something new was born, a calm that could not be shaken by words or excuses. It was cold, like morning frost on a window, and solid, like a stone that can't be crushed in your hand. I no longer tried to guess or explain. Everything was clear, and that knowledge became my anchor. The usual trembling inside me was gone. Only resolve remained. I woke up in the morning and looked at Ethan as if a stranger stood before me. His movements, his habits felt foreign. He adjusted his tie, drank his coffee, talked about his plans for the day, and it all looked like a cheap play that only the audience in the front row believed in. And I sat a little farther back and saw that the scenery was cracking. Brooke kept showing up more often. She brought groceries, offered to stay with Chloe, told stories from her life. Her laughter sounded as if it wasn't meant for me. Sometimes I noticed her gaze sliding toward Ethan, a movement too quick to catch in words, but strong enough to feel in my gut. I began playing another role. Now I acted as if I were broken. I smiled at them again, thanked them, agreed to everything they suggested. I let them feel like winners. But behind that smile I hid the plans forming in my head. I started gathering evidence. Not only recordings on the voice recorder, but also photos, notes, details. I left myself little science-like markers on a map leading me to the finale. Once I found a note in his jacket with a hurried scroll, "Thanks for the evening." Another time I noticed a message flash on Brooke's phone with my husband's name. These crumbs of truth I put into my savings jar, knowing one day they would turn into a wall that would collapse on both of them. My mother, Helen, kept repeating her mantra, "Keep the family together, think of the child." But now her words sounded empty. I listened to them as if they weren't meant for me, but for some other woman. I stopped arguing. I just nodded, smiled, and thought, "You're blind too." But I am no longer one of those who close their eyes. At night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window while the whole house was quiet. The lamplight fell on the floor, and I saw my shadow long, motionless. That shadow became a symbol for me. I felt there was no more fuss inside me. I was like that shadow, quiet and steady. I stopped fearing loneliness. I used to think that without them I would be lost, that my life would collapse. But now I saw I was already standing on the ruins. I had nothing left to lose except illusions. And that meant I was free. I remembered each of their steps, every look, every word. They began to relax because they thought I didn't understand anything. But that was exactly my victory. Their confidence made me stronger. Sometimes I felt the urge to scream, to throw everything in their faces. But I learned to keep it inside. I reminded myself the old me would have broken down, the old me would have cried. But the new me was different. I kept my anger like a weapon that couldn't be wasted on little things. In the evenings I looked at Chloe and understood, for her sake I had to finish this game. Her eyes were clear, pure. She didn't know about the lies spreading around us. And I decided she would never see me break. She would see me strong. I began preparing the finale. In my head I arranged this scene, a family dinner, guests, an atmosphere of trust. And at that moment the truth naked, cold like a knife. I knew they could only be destroyed by publicity. Only then could they not deny it. My plan grew sharper. I decided I would gather all the relatives, throw a party. Let them think I was trying to glue the family together. Let them believe in my submissiveness. And then, when they were completely relaxed, I would play the recordings. Let their words echo through the whole house. Let the masks fall not only for me, but for everyone. Ethan and Brooks suspected nothing. Their faces glowed with easy self-confidence. I looked at them and felt my heart beat steadier than ever. Now I was the one controlling the course of the story. Now I was the director, and they were the actors who didn't even know their roles were about to end. I stopped fearing their laughter. I stopped fearing their secrets. All of it became fuel for me. Every touch, every look, I turned it into bricks for the plan I was building. One evening I noticed Brooke had left her earrings at our place. Small, shiny, too noticeable to be forgotten. I picked them up and put them in the box where I already kept her sweater, scarf, notebook. That box became the symbol of my future performance. Each item in it was a piece of evidence, each item proof. And the closer I came to the finale, the calmer I became. Inside me there was no more panic. Only clarity remained. I knew the day of reckoning was near. Sometimes I wonder, what would others do in my place? Spill everything right away, cause a scene, or also wait to strike at the exact moment? I chose the second. And the longer I waited, the stronger I felt I was on the right path. I grew more attentive to details. I noticed the way they exchanged glances, how their hands accidentally touched. Before, those scenes tore me apart inside. Now they gave me energy, because I knew soon it would all end. And one evening I sat by my daughter's crib and suddenly felt I was ready. Not tomorrow, not in a week, ready now. My heart beat steadily, my breathing was calm. I pressed my hand to my chest and understood I was no longer afraid. The finale would be soon. And when it came, their world would collapse as quietly and inevitably as mine had the moment I first saw their eyes. The morning began with transparent light spreading across the floor, making the air fragile like glass. I moved slowly, as if I were preparing not dinner but a stage where silence would be louder than any words. The oven was warming in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filling the air. In the living room I set the glasses so that each reflected the light of the lamp. Everything looked almost cozy, like in a commercial for happiness shown before a movie. Only inside me lived another film, and its ending had already been written in invisible lines. My daughter, Chloe, slept longer than usual that day, as if her body sensed the pause I was preparing for. I adjusted the blanket and held my hand on her chest, catching the steady rhythm. That was my metronome of calm. As long as she breathed evenly, I had no right to tremble. On the dresser lay a small black box. In it I had collected items that once tried to appear accidental: earrings, a scarf, a notebook with someone else's quick scribbles, a thin sweater, and that same bracelet, icy like the touch of betrayal. Beside it, my phone with a playlist of recordings. I had already checked the volume, the way one checks a parachute before a jump. My mother, Helen, had called earlier, briskly confirming the time. Her voice still carried the command to keep pace, but I had already learned to hear those words as the noise of a distant road. My neighbor Jenna wrote briefly that she would drop by later, if needed. I didn't know if it would be, but even the possibility of support felt like a gift. I, Nora, woman and mother, was setting the table for my own truth. My entire former life, a thin shell, had already cracked. I was only carefully bringing the crack to the edge so that the shell would fall away without hurting anyone but those who had broken it. Ethan came with a bag of fruit, kissed me on the temple, like men do when they have something to hide. His scent was half a tone stronger than usual, as if he was trying harder to be himself. Rick arrived half an hour later, with a cake and new lipstick that left a trace in the air. They moved around me along familiar paths, and in that was eerie beauty. Betrayers are always sure the scenery will protect them from exposure. I smiled and thanked them exactly as expected of me. Inside, though, everything was turning into cold ice that did not crack from someone else's laughter. I placed a small speaker on the dresser, as if to play background music. The trembling in my fingers stopped on its own, not by willpower, but because there were no more doubts in me. Every cup, every plate became markers of my resolve, not to cut living flesh with a scream, but to make a clean incision with silence. The guests gathered closer to evening. My mother arrived, a direct gaze, clenched purse in her hand, a thin wrinkle between her brows. Her presence always smelled of order and control. A couple of our mutual friends entered the living room, leaving behind them the friendly scents of perfume and familiar small talk. The house filled with familiar sounds, forks clinking, napkins rustling, laughter and compliments mixing together. I moved among them like between boys, not allowing myself to stop before the right time. Me, my sister Brooke, my husband Ethan, my mother Helen, the roles were set, the audience in place. I felt the air changing. When a bowl on the scale fills to the brim, the water already stands still just before spilling over. I didn't raise a glass. I didn't lead up to a serious conversation. I just pressed a button. The speaker gave a short rustle, as if the house itself took a breath. In the next second, I heard my own walls, which had preserved someone else's voices. They were quieter than in reality, but sharper than any excuse. The words sounded uneven, as if walking over gravel. The pauses scraped against the silence. There was no need to catch intonations, the meaning pierced the air on its own. These weren't confessions, not dramatic lines from TV shows. They were simple arrangements, whispers, careless hints at meetings, tired sighs of "I miss you," a stranger's laughter too close to the neck. And also the thing that sent chills across my skin, mention of traces, of "let her notice," of "this way ends faster." So the bracelet on my pillow hadn't been forgetfulness. It had been a mark on my life, placed by someone else's hands. There wasn't a single word in the room. Silence gripped everyone's throats, even those who didn't know the context. Ethan froze like a man who had suddenly met himself in the mirror. Brooke faded, as if someone had turned off the light beneath her skin. My mother closed her eyes, and the lightest shadow passed across her face, something very much like an admission she had known, or perhaps suspected but hadn't wanted to know. I didn't look at them long. A few seconds were enough to catch their faces without masks, without familiar roles. That picture seemed to burn itself into me, once and for all. I turned off the sound and opened the black box. Onto the table I laid the earrings, the scarf, the notebook, the sweater, the bracelet. Each item was a small anchor holding the truth on the surface. I placed them in a chain like tracks in the snow, easy to follow to the scene of the crime. I wasn't trembling. Inside me it was bright and empty, like in a freshly renovated room, still smelling of paint, where you already know exactly where the table will stand and where the window will be. My mother sank heavily onto the edge of a chair, and for the first time her breathing carried no command. I didn't expect words from her. When a woman lives through someone else's lies, words become empty containers and nothing left to pour into them. I simply noted that her eyes had aged several years in just 1 minute. I saw a wave rise in Ethan's chest, not remorse, no. A wave of panic at the loss of control. I saw how for a quarter of a second he tried to find a gap in my silence where he could wedge in an excuse. But the gap was gone. My silence was smooth like ice, and he was sinking into his own reflections. Brooke clutched the edge of the table as if the table itself could justify her. The knuckles in her fingers turned white. At one point she frowned, as if remembering that inside her had once lived a conscience, and suddenly it felt too tight. I said only a few words, not an accusation, not a curse. Words like an exit sign glowing in the dark, just enough to point the way. Everything else was written in our silence. Those few words didn't sound loud, but inside me they became the final verdict, pronounced not for them, for myself. Then everything moved both quickly and slowly at once. The guests rose in awkwardness. In scenes like these, people become furniture because no one ever taught them how to stand next to someone else's truth. Someone stifled a cough. Someone pretended to search for their purse. The plates on the table became too white. The spoons too shiny. I felt the thin film of propriety falling away in abrupt snaps, each snap echoing under my ribs. I stood and walked through the room to the nursery. Chloe, my daughter, slept quietly the sleep of childhood where there is no place for lies. I stroked her back, put a few changes of clothes in a bag, her favorite toy, a soft blanket with little stars. I wasn't planning a dramatic escape. I was just leaving for a place where my breathing would be steady, where my home would no longer smell of someone else's perfume and someone else's certainty. The keys jingled faintly in my hand. I returned to the living room, picked up my coat. The air grew heavier, time thicker. My mother looked at me with a long gaze in which defeat and strange pride mixed. In that look was the recognition that her endurer had burned my skin but hadn't erased my heart. She nodded to short, barely visible. That was enough. I didn't slam the door. I closed it the way you close a book, carefully, once you've understood the ending and no longer want to go back to the last page to check if you were mistaken. On the stairwell it smelled of cold and metal, and that smell felt honest, unlike everything that had filled the house in recent months. I walked down, holding Chloe close, and with each step a new feeling spread through me. It wasn't sweet like victory, nor bitter like revenge. It was even like the surface of a lake on a windless night. It was the sense that I was leaving the darkness not with a trophy, but with myself. And that was enough. We drove into the evening city, where the traffic lights, like beacons, marked the slow path from the past into the present. I looked out the window and thought my life would become different not tomorrow, but now. In the new place, where the walls had never heard someone else's whispers, I arranged our things with simple, almost childlike movements. I spread out the blanket, set a cup on the windowsill, opened the window a crack to let in the night air. In that simplicity was more strength than in any demonstration. I was finally breathing. The first night passed without sleep, but without pain. I sat by my daughter's crib and listened to the ticking hands of the clock, and not as a sentence, but as a promise of movement. At times tears welled up, but they were warm, alive like rain that clears the air. I let them come. Morning arrived quietly, and with it a new silence. Not the kind that presses down, but the kind that holds. I, Nora, woman and mother, went to the kitchen and made coffee. It was my little celebration, sip by sip reclaiming my body, my thoughts, my voice. I opened the notes on my phone and erased the list of observations that had guided me in recent weeks. Those lines had done their work. Now it was time for them to go. In their place appeared new ones, short, clear plans not for revenge, but for life. Find a part-time job. Find a daycare closer by. Buy a nightlight for the nursery. Write in walks where I would head not toward someone else's excuses but toward my own horizon. Sometimes I caught myself thinking of my mother, of Helen. I understood her endurer was also part of her pain, the one she had hidden all her life. I didn't excuse her, but I would no longer live by her rules. It was like pulling an old splinter from your skin, painful, but instantly easier. I thought of Brooke, of how easily she had stepped over me, over sisterhood. In that thought there was no thirst for retribution, only an empty space where closeness had once lived. Emptiness doesn't need to be filled with revenge, it loves silence. I left silence there. I thought of Ethan, of his confidence from which he had built his world. In that world there was no place for me, but there was a place for my silence, which would now echo for him louder than any voice. I wasn't going to talk to him about what had happened. In some stories, the word enough is the only right answer. The next evening I returned for an hour to the old house. When they went home, I entered as if to collect forgotten things. I walked through the rooms, inhaling the familiar air, and left the keys on the table. Beside them the black box empty. That emptiness would last them a long time. Let them look inside and see themselves there. As I closed the door, I again felt that strange calm I had never known before. I no longer hoped for their remorse, no longer counted on their explanations. My hope was no longer about them. It had become about me. I chose a new apartment with windows facing east, so each sunrise would reach me first. I began walking in the park, where women with strollers told each other stories without names or judgments. I laughed louder than before and cried more quietly than before. For the first time in a long time, I felt my skin become my own and my voice a support, not a plea. Life didn't return what had been taken from me. Life gave me something else of myself. And in that simple truth there was more light than in all our holidays together. I understood that sometimes betrayal is not the end, but a door. And if you breathe evenly and walk without rushing, that door opens inward to where you have long been awaited. I looked at Chloe, my daughter, like a compass that always points north. As long as her hand was in mine, I had direction. As long as her sleep was steady, I had a reason not to jump into the dark waters of the past. I would make mistakes, I would learn, I would fall and rise, but now every step I took would be my own. And when one evening memory tugged at my sleeve to show me their faces, at the moment the recordings cut through the room, I didn't look away. I looked to the end. And suddenly I felt not bitterness, but gratitude toward myself, the one who pressed the button, opened the box, took the child, and left. The ability to leave is also a form of love. For yourself, for your future, for those who stay not because it's convenient, but because they truly care. Life can collapse at any moment, and I accepted that. But along with it I accepted something else. If you have hands to hold your child and a voice to call things by their names, you have everything you need to build a new home. Not from bricks and curtains, but from choice and truth. And in that home, you are the mistress. If you were in my place, would you forgive your husband's and sister's betrayal for the illusion of a whole family, or, like me, would you choose the silence in which a new life is born? Write in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. It's important for me to hear what you think because every such ending inspires someone to their own beginning. That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading what you have to say. If you'd like more, check out the full playlist linked in the description of this video. New real stories are on the way, and I'd love to share them with you. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the latest stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, even the hardest drama stories can end with freedom and dignity.